listeners to the very first episode of Good Crick Talk featuring myself, Benjamin Browning, and my father, Mark Browning. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning, Ben.
We should tell our listeners where we are, I guess. I'm here in San Francisco on the west coast of the United States, and you are in Geelong, Victoria, Australia.
Australia!
Yes, famous for its cricket and other things. What's the weather like in Australia this time of day?
Well, the whole of Australia, we don't have that long for me to do the entire country, but in the southeast corner, it's nice and mild today. We've had some warm weather the last couple of days, and it's cooking up again, so the start of March will be incredibly hot for the start of March. 40 degrees on Celsius on Saturday. Hot for the cricketers as they, in their local comps, get towards their end of the season and to closing in on finals, junior finals time.
So I guess we should tell our listeners a little bit about why we've started this Good Crick Talk podcast, or tubecast as it might be. Dad, you've been a cricket writer for over 30 years, written many cricket articles in various publications when magazines were still a thing, and also had, I believe, 3 cricket books published. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your love affair with Test cricket in particular and your career as a journalist?
Well, my love affair with Test cricket started probably in 1967-68. I went to a day of Test cricket in February 66, but I was only 8. It didn't really impact me. And then I got a cricket kit and in 67 Christmas and started going to games, 4 or 5 day games. And I don't know, it's of all the sports that I watched, it's the one that seems to please me the most. And I love the writing side of it. I love playing, love reading about it, the history of the game. Something that started in 1877 still keeps going. It's just beautiful. Give me more.
Yeah, so there's been quite a bit of exciting Test cricket being played around the world of late. I've seen a bit of the West Indies-England Test series just played in the Caribbean that only finished a week or so ago. And there was also a 2 Test series, which we both agree that 2 Test series are a little bit annoying in that they are a little too short. That 2 Test series that just finished in South Africa was quite an upset, the result there. I don't know if you got a chance to see much of that. Some highlights, perhaps. I saw most of the days in highlight form, but it was. I think even watching it live might have seemed like watching highlights with the amount of wickets that fell, especially in that second Test.
And they were 2 amazing games and totally against anyone's prediction. A closer analysis might suggest reasons why they did actually end up turning the tables and shocking everybody with the result. But the first game was a legendary game. You referred to the West Indies before. It was really interesting to know that Kusal Perera made 153 not out and guided his side home by 1 wicket, chasing 304. In 1999 in the West Indies, the legendary Brian Lara made 153 not out as the West Indies got home in Barbados against Australia by 1 wicket, chasing 308.
That's his 100. Brian Lara hits it over the top. And the West Indies captain, the prodigal son turned Messiah. Gillespie.
So a lovely little bit of symmetry there. Almost perfect, not quite. But that sort of grabbed everyone's attention, didn't it? That was one of the great innings. I saw someone suggest that Pereira's innings was the greatest Test innings of all time. He, ahead of the one that's rated the highest, which is Graham Gooch's 154 not out at Leeds in 1991 against the West Indies, which you and I saw part of. And then, of course, they knocked South Africa over really quickly in the second Test, particularly on the South African second innings, and cantered home. They sort of breezed away like the Cats in the last quarter against Collingwood in the 2011 grand final. It was close, and then they just kicked away in the last quarter to win by 8 wickets. So it really did make people stand up and take notice of Sri Lanka. But I think there's a couple of things when you look back at it. One is that South Africa's last test finished on January the 14th. And they, I think, have pretty much played just white ball cricket since then. Whereas Sri Lanka had had 2 tests in Australia very recently in similar conditions, go to South Africa, and I think they were better prepared than anyone would have thought they were for South Africa. Plus a change at the top, Chandimal being omitted from the side as captain, and maybe Karina Ratner fired them up or something fired them up. Anyway, they certainly performed very well.
Top edge, it's going to go the whole way, is it? Yes, it is. 6 more runs for Sri Lanka.
Well, the other factor I think that's relevant here from the South African point of view is Philander got injured in the first test, so he didn't play at Port Elizabeth. And back-to-back test matches may be too much for someone like Dale Steyn now, although he bowled very well in Durban. He did, on the last day, he really was ineffective. They crammed, as they do these days with the program, they crammed the 2 tests right next to each other. And old man Steyn, one of the great bowlers of all time, but maybe he really couldn't fire up on the last day like they would have liked. I think his shoulder's getting a bit sore again. Something, no one's announced that, but there's a little bit of a feeling that maybe he's getting a bit sore again. So that's another factor. But the really surprising thing to most people was the fragility of the South African batting lineup, which looked good on paper, but just failed to score over 250, I think, in any innings. So that was the real shock. And they missed De Villiers. The Sri Lankan bowlers bowled all right in Australia, even though Australia got a huge score in Canberra. They had Australia 3 for 28 and 3 for 40 in the second innings. So obviously they knew how to bowl with the new ball, which is pretty important in South Africa too.
Yeah, and I think the wickets in South Africa are much more sporting for bowlers throughout an innings, whereas the Australian wickets, or at least the one in Canberra, once the new ball lost its shine, it definitely became easier for batting. You're speaking of Dale Steyn. What do you think? How much Test cricket do you think the great man has left in him?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what his thinking is with the World Cup. So Bangladesh and New Zealand are playing in New Zealand over the next couple of weeks, and that's really the last Test cricket for some time because of the World Cup and the IPL. Nothing really till August after that. So he's going to have a decent break from having to bowl with a heavy workload. So he may like the idea of coming up again next summer, one more summer. He may look at 500 Test wickets. But there is also the chance that soon the South African selectors will tap him on the shoulder and say, like they did with Sean Pollock some years ago, and say, listen, we think it's probably about time that you finished up so we don't have to drop you. Maybe that even happened to Alan Donald a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, his career statistics are undeniable, but there is a lot of bowling talent in the South African setup. And it almost seemed like in that first test, when they were playing Philander batting at 7, they were really picking 4 fast bowls because they didn't want to leave one out. And Steyn, as good as he's been, there were moments in that series when the Sri Lankan batsman did tuck into him a bit. So yeah, it doesn't look great for Dale Steyn, but I guess you can never write off a champion.
No, and he's one of these bowlers. His white ball form's never been as good, or T20 certainly, because he's got a nice clean action and he's so accurate. He's kind of line and length can be a little bit predictable, and so that's Pereira took that risk at the end of the test in Durban and got away with it and hit those big sixes. I think you'll find that the winning shot was a glide to third man.
He does it! He absolutely does it! One of the greatest innings you'll ever see from a Sri Lankan outside Sri Lanka. He's got his team to victory. He's got 150. What a historical day here at Durban.
He's going to lose a yard of pace at his age, but you can compensate like the Courtney Walshes, Dennis Lillys, Sir Richard Hadleys have been renowned as doing over the years. So it doesn't mean it's finished, but certainly there's a question mark over his longevity in the upcoming months and next couple of years.
I've been watching some of the ODI series between England and West Indies. Today's game was rained out, much like it's raining here in San Francisco. It was raining there in the Caribbean, and that game, I think, will be rescheduled. But looking back at the Test series, it was, as you know, I'm quite fond of West Indies cricket, as any Test cricket romantic would be, given their great history of such wonderful players and the colourful cricket that they've produced over the years. It's been a pretty sad state of affairs for some time now, and there's been a few false dawns, but this series was quite a convincing effort from their Test team to win 2-1. We should maybe have a look back at that series a little bit. An Ashes series coming up later this year, which we'll be looking at in the coming months. But looking at England and their performance in the West Indies, you'd have to say that they underperformed quite severely in the first two tests, and their top order batting once again was, rather abysmal. And they had no luck finding an opening batsman to partner Alistair Cook for the last 4 years or so of his career, and they don't seem to have found a suitable replacement for himself. So they're now without really a solid top three at all. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with selection going forward. But
someone's done other research on this. I've looked at it too. I've got 15 names.
Let's hear those names.
Yeah, so it's Nick Compton, Joe Root, Michael Carberry, Sam Robson, Jonathan Trott was given a go after seemingly he had recovered from his Mitchell Johnson trauma. Didn't work. Adam Lyth played the whole of the 2015 Ashes series. Didn't work. Moeen Ali opened the batting in the UAE and didn't work. Alex Hales is a dasher. Ben Duckett. Haseem Hameed is a name to remember because he's only a young bloke. He did okay in India, but has really struggled even for Lancashire since. Keaton Jennings is in and out of the side. Marcus Stoneman looks neat enough, but gets out when he gets to 20. Rory Burns is also a half chance. I think his technique doesn't look great, but I think his bat speed's good enough. Joe Denley bats number 3, but opened the batting one test. And Jack Leach opened the batting in Sri Lanka. He bats down the order for Somerset, was a night watchman opening batsman, which is a very rare occurrence, but that's how desperate England are. And that was shown in those first two tests when they couldn't get any decent runs and then were bowled out for 77 in the first test.
Yes, and you could even extend that mad list to the number of guys that have tried at number 3 in the last little while. I think Bairstow, Stokes, Moeen Ali as well have all been tried there. It's interesting, one name that you didn't read out there was Jason Roy, who obviously has had an exceptional time of it in the ODI side. His technique obviously would come under scrutiny in Test cricket, but he obviously has a great eye and tremendous bat speed as well. I'm not sure what his first-class numbers are like. Does he play for Surrey?
Another Surrey player who easily won the county championship last year. Saw him in a county match at the Oval in 2012 when he was just a wee boy, and he made 70-odd in a really excellent county championship game against Warwickshire. Spinner's wicket, set up a target for Warwickshire, which they eventually just got. Top of the table clash. As I say, Warwickshire won the championship in 2012, so that's 7 years ago. Hasn't really kicked on in red ball cricket, but I reckon he'll get a go because everyone else seems to. So they might as well give him a try.
Talk of England's batting. They obviously found some form there in that third test, which they won convincingly, and it was a little bit disappointing for the West Indies that they weren't able to back it up and compete in that game. Obviously missing Jason Holder, who was banned for being the captain of a side that had a slow over rate, and not the first time he's been banned for this matter. There were some people calling out that it was sour grapes from the ICC for, banning the guy that's sort of reviving West Indies Test cricket at the moment and ranked, I think, the number one all-rounder in the world. They obviously bowled England out twice in 3 days, so they didn't use up that many overs bowling. So there was some conjecture there, but to Holder's performance, to see a West Indian doing so well with the ball and the bat, he's clearly their best player that they've had in a long time. It was quite a sight to see. His 200 in Barbados was some serious hitting.
I think that his absence shows a few things from the third test, shows that there's still issues with depth in all sides, in all international sides, including the West Indies. They've had periods where they've built their side around one star player before, so you can almost the thread was broken, but I can go back in my lifetime to Sir Garfield Sobers, and then there was a little gap. He'd finished in 73, and then Viv Richards was sort of like the premium player in the West Indies lineup, and then by the time Richards finished, Lara came through. Gale sort of half-filled that a little bit, sort of at the end of the first decade of the new millennium, but didn't really stamp his authority as much. And now it's Holder, who's coming of age. He's got he's had for ages a huge responsibility, and they seem quite directionless in a way. Brathwaite's obviously a worthy man and a solid citizen and a really good battling opening batsman, but clearly on day one in the third test they had an opportunity to again put England under pressure, and weren't able to take that opportunity. The fact that he bowled first, again, I think they weren't thinking about the back-to-back test match situation, and West Indies should have taken the bit between the teeth and batted first in the third test. If they'd got over 250, they would have been well in the game. So, yeah, look, I think that's what that showed, that without Holder, they are not going to be a very strong side. Is there a case for saying he's so important to the side that we don't make him captain? They can probably afford to play a game without Brathwaite and still be competitive, but they can't afford to have a game without Holder.
Could he be proxy captain? Would that be allowed? I mean, there's, as long as Brathwaite, does the toss, that's an interesting point, but I don't think that'll happen. I think they'll keep him as captain, and just for inspiration alone, I think he leads with the ball and the bat as well as he does with his on-field leadership of his troops. But it was also exciting in the first two tests. The wickets were more sporting, I guess, than even the third test. There was a bit of pace in it, and Mark Wood obviously extracted a lot of pace and bounce out of that wicket. But it was good to see the wickets in the West Indies with a bit more pace. The second test in Antigua was the wicket was rated as poor. It was a bit up and down, and I watched a lot of that test, and there were some frightening deliveries and some gazunders or grubbers as they're called. So it definitely wasn't a great batting wicket, but it made for some exciting watching, and to see the West Indies unleashing some quick bowling. Alzeri Joseph is only 21 or 22 years old, and he bowls over 140 k's an hour consistently, and obviously Shannon Gabriel's one of the quickest bowlers in the world, and with a bit of grass on the wickets, they definitely had the ball flying around. It was good to see.
Well, I agree with the rating that the Antigua wicket was poor. I think it's one thing to have pace. It's another thing to have the ball spitting at you dangerously, and we don't want to see anyone seriously hurt. I mean, the same thing in Australia for the wicket in Perth. People have been saying to me, "Oh, what a great cricket match and what a great wicket." And well, it was a great cricket match, but it wasn't a great wicket. And I agree with the assessment that you don't want wickets like they've had at the MCG the last 2 years, where the game just progresses at a very slow rate because there's no pace or bounce in the pitch at all. But as I say, you can't have batsmen all the time protecting the ball from their face off a length. You don't want to see that. The other 2 wickets, though, Barbados is obviously a fine wicket. Jason Holder got a double 100. So that's a good cricket wicket. That's what you should be aiming for. You mentioned the pace of the West Indies bowling, but Kemar Roach is the man. I mean, he's been a talent from the word go. We're talking 10 years ago in Australia when he whacked Ricky Ponting on the elbow in Perth and really shook Ricky Ponting up. He hasn't had ups and downs, but he's had injury issues and been in and out of the side a little bit. No ball issues. But he's always been a good bowler and had the talent there, and he's really just put it together this series. Bowled magnificently, really. I mean, swing. No greater compliment could be played for the fact that he reminded me at times of Malcolm Marshall, just for the fact that his size is from Barbados. And Marshall's tremendous ability. That's no greater compliment to Kemar Roach, I don't think, to say that it did remind me a little bit of Malcolm Marshall.
Yeah, the way he moved the ball both ways, with seam and with swing, was exceptional. And yeah, he's always had that ability to take the ball away from the left-hander, but he was moving it in all directions. And yes, again, the English batsman probably committing to the front foot quite a bit and looking to be aggressive especially in the first test. I think Joss Butler was out to Roach, sort of dancing down the wicket and fending it off his chin a little bit. So I think England's approach to batting they weren't really in for the hard fight, and it was interesting to see the West Indies in that second test in Antigua. Really, Darren Bravo's innings, which he had a shocking series. He hasn't played Test cricket for 2 years. I think he'd played one first-class match in that time because of a Twitter fight with the WICB cricket boss, which is just madness. His seniority could have helped the West Indies in the last couple of seasons. They've got a very young batting side, but he was able to play an innings of substance there, batting for, I think, nearly 250 balls for his 50. And really, some people would see that as being boring in this age of T20, that cursed format of cricket, where a strike rate of 100 is seen as being the standard almost, or just par. Whereas I think Bravo was probably batting somewhere in the teens as far as strike rate goes. And but it made all the difference in a low-scoring match.
We won't be able to tell how significant the West Indies winning of the Wisden Trophy this time was. They did win it in 2009. What will be a better indicator is that later this year they're supposed to play India in the Caribbean, I believe. And if that goes ahead, that will be a good assessment about where they're at. India are the best side in the world at the moment, not like the West Indies were in the 80s and Australia were in the 90s and first half of the 2000s. Not that far ahead of everyone else, but they are above the rest of the pack at the minute. And if the West Indies can beat India at home in that series, then that will show that there's genuine progress being made. But I don't think there's any form guide with world cricket at the moment. I spoke briefly to Michael Vaughan at breakfast the day after the test in Canberra finished, and he said there's maybe a little bit of disquiet in the English camp in respect of, whenever teams lose, there's always a blame game going on, and England are as good at that as anybody. And that Australia, he suggested that I should go over the Ashes again because Australia had a real chance of winning them. Well, they do have a chance, but August is a long way away, and a lot of water to flow under the bridge with Australian cricket still between now and then, and English cricket. And Australia in recent times have gone into Ashes series in England favourites. In 2015 they were definitely favourites, and they couldn't handle the English conditions, and Jimmy Anderson and Stuart Broad there. So England are obviously, they're going to produce slow green wickets again, seaming wickets, to try and win the Ashes back. And Australia has to cope with that. It's
interesting to see the way that bowlers are evolving around the world and wickets are being produced. If we go back to the Australia-India series, which was quite an entertaining series. Australia fizzled out a bit towards the end, but it was, what really stood out apart from Pujara's batting, which was, again in the age of T20, was good old-fashioned Test cricket batting in a way that he was able to absorb pressure, use up time, and then sort of counter-attack when the bowler's tired or the ball got softer.
By old-fashioned, sorry to interrupt, by old-fashioned, what do you mean, how old? Because old-fashioned now is Adam Gilchrist, isn't it? And Viv Richards. Who are you referring to when you say old-fashioned? Because I don't think that's only a recent redevelopment from something half a century ago, really. Since the 70s, we haven't seen a lot of that sort of batting that Pujara displayed.
No, certainly the Australian cricket side have done away with that, or had done away with that kind of approach for quite a while. I mean, there were even Justin Langer in his later years for the Australian side would come out and throw the bat for 5 overs, get to 30, and then sort of get into his innings. When I say old-fashioned, I'm probably referring to a style of cricket that I mean, Steve Waugh, I think you could say, not so much in his last few years of his career when he had Gilchrist in his side and Ponting at his best, but Steve Waugh in the 90s against the West Indies in 95 and Jamaica, and he would absorb a lot of balls against quality bowling, and he would wait for his chance to sort of counter-attack or counter-strike. That's the style of batting Pujara employed against Australia, and he faced a lot of quick bowling, a lot of very good quick bowling, and that was able to absorb the pressure. But what stood out for me in that series was the Indian seam bowling, and obviously Jasprit Bumrah is sort of, in the last 12 months or so, has almost come out of nowhere and established himself as a very exciting, medium-fast bowler who, again, is deadly accurate and very quick. He out-bowled the Australian fast bowlers. Maybe, Pat Cummins had quite a good series, but that's the one thing that I think took me most by surprise. And, India produce usually quite rank spinners' wickets, and they play Jadeja and Ashwin together, and they don't usually rely on fast bowling. So for them to produce a fast bowler of that quality is interesting. England's proclivity for grassier seeming slower wickets has sort of brought on the career of, I guess, Tom Curran and Anderson as well. You think we'll enjoy those conditions, but is that short-sighted is my point. Producing bowlers and conditions that are quite narrow, is that a short-sighted way of developing a side?
I think most cricket authorities in each country see the importance of winning at home. So you're right what you say about the English attack. I think you've left out Chris Wokes and Sam Curran. You're probably referring to
yes.
Tom Curran. Yep. Tom Curran, who played a couple of games in the last Ashes series in Australia. There's always been an element of that. Any historian of the Ashes will know that England have had the greatest reputation of that. There's the Fusarian wicket at Leeds in 1972 and bringing back Derek Underwood in the side. There's the turning wickets at Leeds, Manchester and the Oval in 1956 where Jim Laker finished with 46 wickets at 9.6, I think it was, for the series.
Yeah, he's out! 10 wickets to Laker.
So they've always had a tendency to do that, but so has every country. Bumrah is a revelation to a lot of people. India have known that they've had a special talent with this guy for a little while and didn't want to burn him out, banging the ball into flat surfaces in Chandigarh and Bangalore, etc. So they've kept him up their sleeve. They used him in England and he did a good job there. They lost 4-1 in England, but that was just totally inappropriate scoreline for the competitiveness of the series. I think people knew, and I certainly wrote about that in the Universal Tour Guide, that India had their best ever chance of winning the series in Australia. That's not the best batting Indian side of all time. 2003-4 series, they made a power of runs down here when Warner and McGrath were out of the Australian team. They made a lot of runs. They had Australia on toast on Boxing Day Test as well, and then Australia with some good out cricket, good fielding, good catching, and the bowlers doing the job. brought the series back to 1-1, and the wicket was too flat in Sydney for a result, even though it was a good game, a memorable game, one of the more memorable draws, but all for the batting reasons. But no, Bumrah is, yes, the fastest and best fast bowler I've ever seen from India. I do say I wonder what would have happened if he'd been in England or Australia. Would his action, the coaches have changed his action, because it is unusual. But he's very strong around the chest, like Jeff Thompson was in the mid-70s. Slings the ball without much of a run-up. He was great. He was great.
His left arm doesn't really come up, and I think that's the mechanics of his action aren't that bad, but it's a little off-putting because he doesn't really raise his left arm, so he sort of, it looks a little stranger than it is. But yeah, the way he gets through, he has a lot of power at the crease. He really doesn't have a very long run-up.
Yeah, chest and shoulder. And one of those actions that's hard to pick up. So Mitchell Starc, Dale Steyn, I mentioned, those guys, they're nice and clean, and they're bowling mid 140s, Starc even over 150 in Canberra, and did very well, got 10 wickets in the match. But you can see the ball all the way, where you can't with a guy like Bumrah or Mitchell Johnson or earlier Jeff Thompson. It's not as clean an action. So yeah, it makes it a bit harder. But he's a good bowler anyway, and they've used him very well. Mohammad Shami bowled really well. Ishant was a good support too. And their background, they've got Umesh Yadav, who's no mug either. So they now know how to be competitive overseas. But they could do with another couple of batsmen as well. I think top order batsmen. Darwan and VJ just about finished as players. So the guy they brought in Melbourne, Agarwal, he looks a decent opener too.
Thanks everyone for listening to the inaugural episode of Good Crick Talk with myself, Ben Browning, and my dad, Mark Browning. It's been nice to chat to you, Dad. We'll have more interesting crick topics to go over, and see if we can't delve into your wealth of cricketing history knowledge, and maybe uncover some tales from old.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye, everyone.